Unfortunately, for me, I am haunted by TED Talks. I've given a few of them, and two in particular were to do with, one with reading the Quran and the other with Muhammad himself. And everybody then thinks that I speak as fluently and as oratorically perfectly as I do in those talks. That is impossible, because I should tell you that TED Talks are edited. They take out all the flubs, they take out all the, what was it I meant to say? They take out all the, no, wrong way round, and so on. They light it all perfectly and so on. So you come out looking just splendid instead of real. So I'm sorry to tell you that tonight you've got the real me. Okay, but this is how I began the TED Global Talk, which was in 2013. Writing biography, I said, is a pretty strange thing to do. It's a journey into the foreign territory of somebody else's life. An exploration that can take you places you never imagined going and still can't quite believe you've been. Especially if, like me, you're an agnostic Jew and the life you've been exploring is that of Muhammad. But then I didn't really go on to tell just how strange it was, so I'd like to talk about that just a little bit tonight. Because you see, I know everybody thinks that I wrote After the Prophet, which really is an epic story of the split between Shia and Sunni and how it happened in the first 50 years after the death of Muhammad. They think that I wrote that after the life of Muhammad. Wrong way round. It was the other way round. I'd never have dared. I've never had the, in Yiddish it's called the chutzpah, the gall, the cheek, to just go straight into the life of Muhammad. In fact, I said no when somebody suggested it. In fact, I laughed. I said, are you kidding me? But then came up this question of how come the Shia-Sunni split had, how did this begin? Why were people still actually killing each other over it? And that was the question that I went into for the next 4 years. And then the moment, that book, of course, starts with the death of Muhammad. And then the moment I finished that, that's when I knew I was ready, finally, to write the life of Muhammad. But I wrote on After the Prophet, the first book, under the radar, as it were, which is how writers always work, you know. It's not like we announce to the world that we're going to write a book and then sit down and write it with the world looking over our shoulder. We sort of stay, you know, we're alone inside four walls with all our books, our research sort of weighing down, you know. I live in a houseboat, so you can always tell it's a raft. It's a shack built on a raft in Seattle. So you can always tell when I'm really into research, because it feels like half the University of Washington Research Library is on my floor. So many piles of books that the whole raft goes lower and lower and lower in the water. And then when I finish a book, I give all the books back and the raft rises in the water again. But the first Muslim was different, and I blame TED Talks, because what happened was that the first talk I gave, it was a TEDx talk, a local TED Talk, at Benaroya Hall in Seattle. It was a favor to a friend. I had no idea then what TED Talks were. For those who don't know, it's TED, T-E-D, stands for Technology, Entertainment, and I always forget the D. What is the D? Huh? Design, thank you. Right. Technology, Education, and Design. None of which, entertainment and design, none of which actually apply to me. So it's no wonder I hadn't heard of them. And she persuaded me to do a 9-minute talk. She knew that I was beginning the biography of Muhammad. And she said, how would you like to give, you know, a 9-minute talk on the biography of Muhammad? And I said, no. 9 hours maybe, but 9 minutes, no way. But then I just finished reading the Quran in as much detail as I could, a project that I thought would take 3 weeks, and in fact, as some of you know, it took 3 months. And I realized, okay, maybe that would be a 9-minute TED Talk. And I mentioned in the TED Talk that the reason I was reading the Quran this way was because I was writing a biography of Muhammad, and it seemed the matter of the most basic respect, that I study the words we could be most sure he actually said, most sure actually came out of his mouth, as closely as I could. And as far as I was concerned, I was talking to a few hundred people in this hall in Seattle. And I knew there were cameras there, but I didn't really pay any attention because I hate cameras. Oh God, there's cameras here too. And in any case, the lights were very bright and I couldn't see them. So I wasn't quite aware that this was going to go online. I wasn't that much online myself. In any case, it went online. And an awful lot of people apparently started watching it. So many people started watching it, the big TED, TED.com, decided to put it on their site. And then it went completely viral. And this was a very strange experience because it had never occurred to me that the words Leslie Hazelton and viral could go together in the same sentence. You can laugh at that. It's okay. It was just totally surreal. But what this meant was that I sat down to write The First Muslim with what felt like 1.5 billion Muslims looking over my shoulder. When I say what felt like it, is that I was getting hundreds and hundreds of emails and comments on Facebook and so on, all very concerned that I get it right. Attaching very often in email various tracts written by their teachers and and preachers whom they admired, urging me to read them, and deeply theological tracts. And I know I call myself, the blog is called The Accidental Theologist, but a theologist is very different from a theologian. We study it, but we don't actually do it. So, but I understood the concern, and it was a very, very deep concern. And the concern was that, there has been so much written in attack of Muhammad, and he is so revered and so loved by Muslims, that they were really concerned that I would do a bad job. And I couldn't actually assure them that I would do a great job. All I could do, and I did reply to everyone, and I said, I truly understand your concern. But please understand that I'm an outsider. I'm writing this book from the outside. So how I write about Muhammad will not be the way you yourself would write about Muhammad, and not necessarily even the way you would like to read about him. I'm writing mainly for non-Muslims. I am an agnostic Jew. I'm trying to come to my subject with, obviously with respect, because why else would I be spending all this time studying him? But from my point of view. So please just believe me when I say that I come to it in good faith, and that my intentions are good, though I do realize how limited good intentions can be. And the responses were amazing. People would reply. First of all, they seemed to be surprised that I'd replied in the first place. And secondly, they said, Inshallah, you'll do it well. They placed their faith in me. Which was very moving. But still, every morning, I would sit down at my desk. There I was in 21st century Seattle, with the mist rising off the lake that my houseboat is on. And I'd sit down at my desk to 7th century Mecca and Medina, which was actually a wonderful feeling because it felt like I was, spanning half the world and almost half of history. It was amazing just to be able to do that. I have, by the way, there's an olive tree on my deck just to remind me of the Middle East, just to keep it close in Seattle. And all those books in piles on the floor. But still, every time I sat down at my desk every morning, I had to sort of take off those, well, not 1.5 billion, but all those people who were so concerned that I would get it right. I would have to sort of like taking off a shirt and sort of hanging it on a hook behind me, and I would say, I'm sorry, I cannot do this with you looking over my shoulder. You just have to really have faith that I will do my best. And if you want to come back and criticize what I write afterwards, That's okay. But first of all, I've got to do it, and I've got to do it my way. They weren't the only people, though, that were concerned. There was a whole other bunch of people who were concerned, and that was my non-Muslim friends in Seattle. Words like fatwa kept on being thrown about, right? They were really concerned, because there's been so much stereotyping of Muslims where, 1.5 billion Muslims get stereotyped by the actions of a very small, very loud, and very ugly minority. And they were as liable to these stereotypes as anyone else. They said, what if there's a fatwa on you? And I thought, oh, please, just relax. But they also were truly and sincerely concerned. And they said, are you sure you know what you're doing? And the answer was actually, yes, I do know what I'm doing. I want to ask what I call the deceptively simple question. Such a simple question, isn't it? Who was he? So simple. Who was he really? Who must he have been? How did this one man radically change not only his world, but the whole of history? And I wanted to do it in a way that accorded him the integrity of a full life lived. I didn't want to edit him. I didn't want to censor him. I wanted to see him as fully as I could as a three-dimensional man. And I wanted to do this particularly because I had read a lot of biographies of him by then. And they fell into various types. There were the ones, there were the pious, devout biographies, which if you are a pious, devout Muslim, work. But if you're not, you just go, no, right? It felt like there wasn't a real person there. Then there were the academic biographies. Well, I've said the word academic, so you can imagine that I've read a lot. I read just about all of the academics for this book, but they're very hard to read, let's just put it like this, and very dry. There's no sense of story there. Now, I come to it as a writer and as a psychologist. And as a writer, I can see a magnificent story that has not, to my lights, to my mind, been told well, certainly not for a Western non-Muslim audience. I can see an incredibly dramatic life. How did he do it? How did this man born in the margins of his own society? I know he was a member of the Quraysh tribe, but he was orphaned before he was even born. His father died before he was born, in a society where you were defined by your father. He was farmed out to the Bedouin, but I mean, he was the last one taken, to be a wet nurse with the Bedouin. Because who wanted to take him? Because there was nobody to pay the Bedouin the fee. There was no father there. The grandfather, Al-Muttalib, was also not paying. The uncle was not paying. It was just basically the Bedouin woman who took him. Halima took him out of pity. And usually kids who were farmed out to the Bedouin for wet nursing because it was healthier, because, Mecca was, people were concerned about plague, about illness. It was a town with very narrow alleys. So there was this awareness that, for a child to be weaned out among the Bedouin in the desert was much healthier. But usually they were brought back after 2 years. Muhammad stayed with his Bedouin foster family for 5 years. And I started asking why. How come so long? Why was there nobody to take him back in Mecca? And then when he finally did come back, his mother was still not married again, which was very, very unusual at the time. By the laws of the time, her husband, her dead husband's, at least her dead husband's, one of his brothers should have married her, should have brought her back into the family in order to look after her and the child. And that hadn't happened. Something here was very wrong. The system of this whole social system of Mecca was breaking down. And I could feel this, I could see this. The profit motive had P-R-O-F-I-T, the profit motive had taken control. And all the old tribal values where you look after the poor, you look after the weakest member of the tribe, because a tribe was defined by its weakest member, which is going by the wayside. He comes back a year later, his mother died. He's now doubly orphaned. He's put to work as a camel boy on the caravans. I mean, he really is in the margins. And one way or another, he works himself up. Very slowly, he becomes the Amin, the one whose judgment is respected, the one who can be relied on, the one whose word is absolutely trusted, and so on. And though he doesn't become a senior member of Mecca, he becomes respected. And he marries this wonderful woman, Khadija, right? She proposes to him because he can't propose to her. Not only is he younger than her, he's poor. She's wealthy, right? Twice a widow. They marry. It's an extraordinary marriage, a marriage of great respect and of great love. And this is what Westerners, who know all about the 9 late-life wives whom he married after Khadija died, they don't seem to realize that this loving, monogamous marriage lasted 24 years until her death. And you can see the love of that marriage in what happened that night when he had the first revelation on Mount Hira. Because here is this man at 40 years old. His life has turned out infinitely better than he could ever have expected as a child, as an orphan child. He's now respected in his community in Mecca. He's married to a woman he loves and who loves him. They have 4 beautiful daughters. No son, which will turn out to be a problem, but not yet. And yet he's up there on the mountain in meditation. Now, what was he doing up there on the mountain, right? Was he in retreat, as many people do still today, just hoping for, a moment of peace, perhaps a moment of insight, perhaps a small epiphany? I don't know. Who can know? But I do know from his response to what happened on that night. And his response is there in the earliest Islamic biographies, in the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq, repeated again in the Tarikh of Al-Tabari. So the earliest Islamic biographies, we have Muhammad's own account of what happened that night. And it is clear that that first revelation of the Quran was not only soul-rending, but also physically rending. His account of it reads almost like, this is what struck me so strongly. My father had open heart surgery twice, and it felt like reading about open heart surgery without anesthetic. Just this immense weight, this vast fear, this feeling that he could not possibly stand it anymore. In fact, he would later say that he never had any revelation come to him without feeling that he just didn't have the strength to take it anymore. God talks to a human. I mean, this giant barrier has been broken, and he is terrified. So, what you would expect if this were hagiography, if this were sort of, the usual kind of, account of a saint or something like this, what you would expect was that Muhammad receives the first revelation of the Quran up on Mount Hira, 5 verses, and says, "Hallelujah," comes down the mountain, sort of, radiating light, halo and so on, choirs of angels, ethereal songs and so on, saying, "I have it, I have the truth, this is it, I bring you the good news," right? I bring you the gospel, which is what gospel means, good news. And that's not at all what happened. What happened instead was utterly, utterly human. It just smacked me as a psychologist of reality. What happened was that he was so terrified he thought he was losing his mind. And his first impulse was that out of shame that he had gone mad, he was going to throw himself off the highest peak and kill himself. And I'm not making this up. It's there in Ibn Ishaq, and it's there again in Al-Tabari. And then the angel Gabriel appears and says, no, this is real. Right? But that's not much consolation, because just imagine a human being on a mountaintop. God speaks to him. I don't even care if you believe that the words he heard were those that came out from outside him, were actually the words of God, as every believing Muslim does, or as many non-Muslims do, that it came from inside him and that he interpreted it as the word of God. In fact, mystics would say there's no difference between the two, that God is inside you anyway. But that doesn't make any difference to me in any case. Because what was clear to me was that Muhammad did experience these words. Experience them, he said, like they were engraved, being engraved on my heart while he was conscious. That's how deep they went. He came running down that mountain in terror and in awe and in fear. He came running down that mountain as fast as he could, and he ran for the one person to whom he could tell, with whom he could find comfort from this terror that he experienced. And that one person was Khadija, his wife. And he runs in, and he buries his head in her lap, and he says, cover me with your shawl. I think I have lost my mind. And she does, and he tells her what happened. And she then says the most wonderful thing. She doesn't say hallelujah. She doesn't say, you are the prophet of God. She says, I think you may be the prophet of God. I think you may be the prophet of this people. And I love those two conditionals. I think you may be. There's no certainty there. There's no absolutism there. But it's just, isn't that human? The reassurance of that. And then, what follows then? And again, so human. So you think, okay, if this were just, a regular story, the first revelation has come, now all the rest will come. There'll just be this flow of revelation, one after the other, the word of God being revealed. Not what happens. Look in the Quran, not what happens. 2 years pass. 2 years. 2 years in which, after what's happened on that mountain, Muhammad cannot go back to his business as a trader, as a representative of a trading agent. I mean, how can you, after something like that has happened? He spends 2 years trying to come to terms with it, struggling with it, wrestling with it, wondering, why is God not speaking to him again? Why is he not hearing that voice again? Feeling more and more abandoned. And abandonment especially goes deep for someone who's been doubly orphaned in childhood. And then finally comes the second revelation, which is called the revelation of the morning, which starts off, no, Muhammad, we have not forgotten you. We have not abandoned you. And this is just all, to me, this all smacks of reality. This is where these two events, this is where I see Muhammad real. This is what made him real for me. More than anybody telling me what a great man he was, more than anybody telling me how devoutly they believed that he was the prophet of Islam. These very, very human reactions, this is what made him real for me, allowed me to begin to see him as a human being, as a real historical figure. And yes, I have no doubt as to the historical reality of that night on Mount Hira, because the psychology of it is so true. And this is what I was looking for all the time while I was writing. How long have I been speaking now? I don't want to go on too long, because the most interesting stuff is not me rambling on. It's you. It's your questions and my attempts at response, because sometimes the questions are so deceptively simple that I actually have no answers. But you know, okay, let me just go into, let me skip everything else I had ready here. Let me just go into one aspect of Muhammad that many non-Muslims, especially today in the West, focus on. And they see him and they see Islam, by extension, as a religion of war, which I think is the most absurd way to talk about any religion. No, I do not think Islam is a religion of peace. Neither do I think it's a religion of war. I do not think Judaism is a religion of peace or a religion of war, or Buddhism, or Hinduism, or Christianity. I do not think that these are terms in which it makes any sense at all to think of a religion. Because those who are warlike, right, will use religion as their excuse. Those who are peaceful will find in their religion the impulse to be peaceful. In other words, we bring ourselves to religion. It's we who make religion. And if we are violent and ugly and full of hate, we will bring that to religion, and we will interpret our religion in that way. And if what we want is to live with each other in peace, we will find that in our respective religions, and we will come together in peace. So, let me just tell you my favorite verse from the Quran, which is here somewhere. Some of these verses, it says, are definite in meaning, and others are ambiguous. The perverse at heart, there's plenty of those around these days, aren't there? The perverse at heart will eagerly pursue the ambiguities, trying to create discord by pinning down meanings of their own. Only God knows the true meaning. And I love that. The Quran is infinitely more subtle than many people seem to imagine. So this really is something to bear in mind next time somebody, thumps the Bible or waves the Quran around in the air and says, this is what it says. And that phrase, God is subtle, appears several times in the Quran. Excuse my Arabic pronunciation, but in Arabic, Allah latifun khabir. And in fact, the whole of the Quran is far more subtle. And this is an essential part of its power. It contains the awareness that things can't be stated directly. The divine cannot be stated directly. That the divine is beyond direct human apprehension. And it can only be expressed through metaphor. And metaphor, the poetry of metaphor, is what allows the mind, the human mind, to expand, to roam, to explore, to soar. And this is why fundamentalism is not only dangerous, it's dull. It's so dull because it sticks to the literal meaning of things. And when I talk about fundamentalism, I'm not only talking about Muslim, Islamic fundamentalists, I'm also talking about Jewish fundamentalists, Christian fundamentalists, Buddhist fundamentalists, Hindu fundamentalists, all those people who insist that there is only a single meaning, and what else do? They cherry pick. You know what it is to cherry pick? You just pick the cherries you want off the tree. Say the Quran is a tree. You just pick this cherry or that cherry. I call it the highlighter version of the Quran. I take you one of those yellow highlighters and you just mark the phrases that you want to mark, that you want to use. And you ignore all the rest. And of course, you take them out of context. So what I want to get to, and then I will open it up to the floor, except it will take me 10 or 15 more minutes to get to it. I'm sorry. What I want to get to is one phrase that is used by both Muslim fundamentalists and by Islamophobes, who really are partners in crime, so far as the Quran is concerned, because they use exactly the same highlighter phrases. They sort of shout them back and forth at each other, right? Here's one, I'll give you this one. No, I'll give you that one and raise you this one, and so on. That's all they ever read of the Quran. So let's talk about what they call the sword verses. I guess I don't need to tell you that there's no swords in the sword verses, but never mind. And the sword verses I read completely out of context because the Quran actually doesn't give you context. The Quran is written in the voice of God speaking to Muhammad, telling him what to tell everybody else. And, you know, why should God give context? And it's also sort of taken for granted that the people to whom Muhammad is talking will know what he's talking about, partly because many of the revelations came in response to questions from his followers. So I'm talking now about the time, and the year is 630. This is 8 years after Muhammad has been exiled from Mecca. And yes, I mean exiled. For 12 years after that first revelation, he obeyed the command of the Quran and said the verses, repeated the verses, preached them in Mecca. This did not make him popular, because what he was saying was, it was a plea for social justice, basically. It was an argument against the oligarchy and against the greed and against the corruption that was running the city. It was an argument to take care of the needy, of the orphaned, of widows, of slaves, of freed slaves, of everybody who was shut out. Basically, it was an argument of the 99% against the 1% who were running the city and making a huge profit of it. Profiting, by the way, from piety, profiting from the fact that Mecca was a center of pilgrimage called the Hajj, pre-Islamic. All the pre-Islamic tribes would come there. It was a major pilgrimage center. So, you know, the powers that be responded as powers that be will when they are challenged. They forced him out of Mecca under pain of death, and he founded a whole new community in Medina based on the principles of equality, social justice, economic justice. And over the next 8 years, there were 3, they're called battles. By those who like to fight, they're called battles. They're even called great battles between Mecca and Medina. They weren't. They were skirmishes. And certainly 2 of them were started unintentionally because everybody was doing everything they could to avoid them. But in any case, peace clearly had to be made between the 2 cities. Medina was becoming more powerful under Muhammad, who had actually united all the tribes of that city. So what happened was a negotiated return of Muhammad to Mecca, negotiated with those who were now in power in Mecca, who had opposed him, who had been his most bitter enemies. They sat down with him outside the city and they negotiated his return. So his followers were all, wow, wonderful. But they say, well, you know, but there's still some people who oppose this agreement, who oppose this negotiation. So what happens if we walk in there and they attack us? It's meant to be a city where nobody attacks anybody. It's a holy city because it has the shrine in it and so on. But what happens nonetheless if they attack us? And here's what the Revelation says. It says, yes, you may kill the unbelievers. And that's all you hear, isn't it? Just that phrase. That's the one the Islamophobes use, and that's the one the Islamist extremists use. Here's what follows after. Yes, you may kill the unbelievers, but only if they attack you first, and only if they try to stop you reaching the Kaaba, the shrine, and only if the truce we now have in place falls through, and only if no other truce is in place or can be negotiated, then you may. And I was fascinated by this, fascinated to find the whole of it there. You didn't even need to go to the histories to find the context. It was right there in the Quran. And I was also fascinated because there was something in there of a phrase, you know, my mother used to use, which was, you know, better if you don't. And this is so typical of the whole way Muhammad preached, of the whole way the Quran approaches so many questions. It's not trying to change. It's not trying to impose change. Of course, it's trying to change. It's not trying to impose change on the pre-Islamic tribes. It's respecting their traditions. It recognizes that change is hard. It's not trying to force change, which is why two of the words most used in the Quran are think and consider. Think this, consider this. Think about it, you know. Maybe better if you don't. And this comes up again and again. And by the way, what did Muhammad do after the Fatah? Which, for those who like battles instead of skirmishes, is often translated as the conquest of Mecca. It's a total mistranslation. Fatah is opening. It's the opening of Mecca to Muhammad and to Islam. And what does he do? He doesn't take the throne. He doesn't take charge. He doesn't demand submission from everybody. He doesn't have them parading in front of him, pledging allegiance to him. He says, good. And he appoints all his former enemies, his top former enemies now, as his top aides, right? And as the administrators of Mecca. And he goes back to Medina, and 2 years later he dies. And I think that says it all. The way this man who has the reputation of being violent, in fact, when you actually read both the Quran and the early histories, did all he could to avoid violence. The way he negotiated, the way he tried to include, the way he did not impose his beliefs or his message, but tried to persuade constantly. And what is astonishing is that he succeeded. This, to me, is the most astonishing thing, that in 12 years, no, sorry, not 12 years. First revelation was 610, 22 years. It took him 22 years. But he died having achieved what he was told to achieve that first night on Mount Hira. That is truly astonishing. I'd just like to stop there and say, just say it's an honor to be here. It's a total delight to be in Sri Lanka. It's an honor to speak with the Compassion Initiative. And it's exciting to see people from so many faiths and so many strands within each faith coming together. Because that's where we have real power. It's when we come together that we can stand up against the nutcases and the fundamentalists in our own faiths and in our own traditions. It's then that we can find a common voice that says, no, not in our name. No, you do not speak for us. No, what you are doing is an obscene travesty of everything we hold dear. It's an obscene travesty of everything Muhammad held dear, and it's an obscene travesty of the very idea of God. So let me just finish with this, and then we'll open it up. Because this is real chutzpah. Chutzpah, the Jewish thing, this is gall. But I am pretty sure that after having kept daily company with Muhammad as a writer for 5 years, the 5 years it took me to write the first Muslim, I cannot see that Muhammad himself would be anything but utterly outraged by the militant extremists who claim to act in his name today. I cannot see that he'd be anything but appalled at the repression of half the population, the female half of the population, because of their gender. I cannot see that he be anything but dismayed at the bitter divisiveness of sectarianism. He would call out terrorism for what it is, not only criminal, but the most obscene travesty of everything he believed in and struggled for. And he'd say what the Quran says. Anyone who takes the life of all humanity. Anyone who saves the life saves the life of all humanity. And he would commit himself, as I know many people here today have already done, fully to tolerance, to inclusiveness, to social and civic justice, and to the very hard and very thorny process of making peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. That was really amazing. Thank you so much. So you kept us going for a good 45 minutes, I have to tell you. Wonderful job. No.
I apologize. Once I get going, I know it's hard to stop me. I can talk for 24 hours about Mohammed, you know.
So I'll just make one comment and then open the floor for questions. We have until about 8:30 for questions. So be as brief as possible, please, and no long commentaries, brief questions. The first thing I wanted to say was that I really appreciated, of course, the illustration of, the kinds of interpretations and the sort of the misquoting of the Quran and all of that. That's greatly appreciated. But what really struck me, Leslie, is the way in which you humanize the Prophet. And I really appreciated that. But you humanized him without taking away the enormity of the contact with the divine. I thought that was just amazingly done by you. Thank you so much for that. So that's just a comment from me. For the rest of the audience, now we open it up, and you can ask her your questions. Yes.
Leslie, to write about him, what made you pick on when you had so many other things you could have written on? I'm just baffled.
Well, like I said, okay, I'd written a biography of Mary, right? In fact, the subtitle was A Flesh and Blood Biography. And there's a long story how that came into being, but I was already living in Seattle by then, and it felt wonderful because it felt like I was coming back to myself, to my Middle East self. I lived in Jerusalem for 13 years, then I was back and forth for a long time. Finally, it was driving me nuts, the politics of it, and so I had to get out. But once you live in the Middle East, and I'm sure it's the same, once you live in Sri Lanka, it never leaves you. It's part of you. You can't, there's that olive tree on my deck in Seattle. So somebody suggested it. Somebody came to me and asked me, said, I would love you to write a biography of Mary. And the moment she said it, it was like fireworks went off in my mind. I said, as in virgin, just to make sure, right? She said, yeah. And I said, as she really was, first century Palestinian girl living under Roman occupation, right? She said, yeah. I said, nothing like that satin-robed, diademed, pale figurine in the niche of the convent school I went to when I was a kid. And she said, yes, yes, yes. And I'm going, oh, God, yes, yes, yes. And somehow I knew that book hadn't been written. I have no idea how I knew it. And I knew that it would take me back to the Middle East, not physically, but that this was my way of being in the Middle East and outside at the same time. I could be in first century Palestine and then it was 20th century Seattle at the same time. And this was just tremendously exciting. And then after that, I wrote, and also, it was not planned. It sounds like, God, what perfect planning. First she writes the book about the Virgin, then she writes the book about the harlot, Then I wrote the story of Jezebel, right, who's the big harlot queen of the Bible, who in fact was a magnificent Phoenician princess. And, who, if she had any fault at all, is that she was too loyal a wife. but wonderful, sort of just. And it felt like I was giving each of these women back to themselves, making them real again. And that the real story, insofar as I could uncover it by using psychology, by using Middle East history, by using history of religion, by using mythology, by using anthropology, by using compassion, and what's called the historical imagination, by trying to put myself there, and also for my sense of place, having lived in the Middle East, So I know what it feels like, to have thorns in your feet, to have the dust in your eyes and your ears and your nose and so on. Then I've lived with Bedouin in the Sinai desert, so I know what that's like too. So it was just very exciting to be able to do that. And then, then a friend says, I think it's time that you should write a bigger biography. This is a friend, another writer in Seattle. And he said, you should write a biography of Mohammed. And that's when I, yeah, great, thank you, right. Next one, right? But the next time we got together, I'd been reading, because I was between books, and a writer between books is a horrible creature. It's like an actor between gigs, you're just restless and you're impossible to live with, and you don't know what to do with yourself. So I'd read some of the biographies and the English ones, and I could not really understand how anybody could take such an absolutely incredibly dramatic life and make it boring, but they did. They really did. It was what my mother would have called a snooze. I mean, how can you do that? And I could see that, every single one of them referenced in the back Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, so I went and read Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, and that's when I knew they hadn't read them. They hadn't read them. They said they'd read them. They hadn't. Because in Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, there was all the juice, all the vitality of real life, all the detail. It felt like being back there again. It was just, it was tremendous. And that's when I really knew, that I had to tell a story, but still not the story of Muhammad. That was going too far. But this was 2004, and it was just after that whole series of attacks one morning in Karbala, in Iraq, Sunni on Shia. And the question then was, how has this happened? How has it come to this? How, we have Muhammad, the prophet of unity, one people, one God. How, the question put to me by a friend was, how could he leave behind him, practically on his deathbed, this seemingly unending legacy of bloodshed and division? And I knew that was a question. It wasn't even a deceptively simple question. It was a deceptively complex question, but it was something I knew that I could really sort of get into for the next 4 years. And I did, and discovered this truly epic story. I mean, of course it's lasted so long. Just look at the story. It's so powerful, But then, okay, I won't go to it anymore right now. But
yes, we have 3 more questions.
But the moment I finished after the Prophet, which, of course, begins with the death of Muhammad. That's when I knew I actually was ready to write the life of Muhammad. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 questions on that side. And then back here. Yeah, there were 3 there first.
Hi, Miss Leslie. We are happy to have you. I do research on Islam. So I came across this book called The 100 Most Influential People in History, written by Michael H. Hart, who is an American. What do you think about that book? Do you think that Prophet Muhammad is the most influential person in history? My second question is, I found that you had written a book about the Shia-Sunni split. Were the Jews involved in this?
I'm sorry, what was
Were the Jews involved in the Shia-Sunni split?
The Jews involved, of course the Jews are involved in everything, The Jewish plots, to bring down the world, and the Jews should take control. Yeah. Come on.
Okay. My third question is, how did the Prophet die? Can you explain about it?
First of all, was he the most influential of the 100 most influential men who ever lived? Notice that that's men and not women. Are there any women on that list? I think it started out as a Time magazine thing. Does it really make any difference if I say he was the first or the second or the third or the fourth? Are we really going to make these kind of lists? This is a man who radically changed, as I said, his own society and is still radically changing our world. One of the most influential, most definitely. The most influential, I don't know. The Jews behind the Shia Sunnis, actually I thought it was the CIA behind the... Thank you. What was the third question? How did Muhammad die? Well, as far as I can make out, oh, you're into the Jews killed him? The symptoms, and I checked this out very carefully. I called as many neurologists as I could about it. Muhammad died, he was age 62, nearly 63. And for his time, that's a very, very, very long life. The average life at the time was in the late 30s, the average lifespan. We don't appreciate that nowadays. We really don't appreciate the huge changes brought about by antibiotics, especially. But it took 10 days, and every single symptom that I could, that was in the early histories points to, sorry about those P's, points to meningitis, which was very, very rampant at the time. It was common all throughout the Middle East at the time. It still is, in fact, but now there's medicine for it. There wasn't at the time. It involved blinding headaches, extraordinary sensitivity to light and to noise. And the headaches, the pain went shooting up and down the back and the neck especially. High fever that came and went until it finally got so high that, and the duration is usually about 10 days until death. And it seems pretty clear that it was meningitis. What was extraordinary, of course, was what went on in the sick room during those 10 days. The way everybody was gathered there, the way everybody was trying to figure out who would be the successor, who would take charge of this newly united, nearly all of Arabia by now was newly united in allegiance to Muhammad. And in the idea of Allah as the one great God, but that also was not new. I don't think many people appreciate that, how much Muhammad brought in other traditions, earlier traditions, right? Many of the rituals of the Hajj today were actually pre-Islamic. They existed before Muhammad, and he incorporated them into Islam. And this is this thing of inclusion instead of exclusion. Yes, we will bring you in. We will make you part of us. Yes, we will honor and respect your traditions and make them ours too. Where was I going with this? Oh, with the, yeah. So, I mentioned earlier that he didn't have a son. There was one son who died in infancy, and that he never had any children with the late life wives. Only with Khadija. So, by the norms of the time, if he'd had a son, then the son would have automatically been the leader, the successor, the Khalifa, the Caliph, right? But there wasn't. And it was the fact that he died without, and this to me is what's extra, and I don't understand it. I can only, there's all kinds of possibilities and so on, but obviously, how can I possibly, dare to read Muhammad's mind? But the Shia would later say that he clearly designated Ali as his successor, and Ali did indeed become the fourth Caliph and the first Imam of Shia Islam. And the Sunni would later say that he clearly designated Abu Bakr as the first Caliph. But he never, though they bring up all kinds of arguments, I do not see any of them as absolutely clear designations. They're all somewhat ambiguous. There was never any clear designation. And so that sick room was full of people very, very eager for him to make the designation, and he didn't. So what followed was kind of, you know, it was basically the bloodline against consensus or kind of proto-democracy. It's hard to tell. It should have all come together with Ali, shouldn't it? It really should. The fourth caliph and the first imam. It should have all come together with him. Instead, what happened? He was assassinated. And he was assassinated by a Khariji, by a refusenik, by basically a member of a movement who were the forerunners of Boko Haram, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. That's who assassinated Ali. And thus created the split.
Okay.
They will divide us. If they possibly can, they will divide you, me, they will divide all of us. If we let them, they will divide us.
Leslie, I have two questions.
Where are you? Hi.
Hi. My second question will basically be asked based on the answer to the reply to the first question. I've heard you thrice now, and you're an agnostic, you say, which means you don't believe in any formal religion.
Wait, no, I'm sorry. You've heard me twice now, and I'm thinking, God, I hope I haven't repeated myself, so I didn't.
No. So as an agnostic, you don't believe in any formal religion. Do you believe in the revelations to Moses, Jesus, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Do I believe in the revelations as
From God?
Okay, what do I mean by being agnostic? It's true, I'm not a believer. I don't believe things. I really shocked somebody who follows my blog once. She said, I can't believe you don't believe in anything. And it was on all caps and lots of exclamation marks. And so on. And I realized then that, you know, and she was dismayed because she trusted me. She'd put her faith in me. You know, she wanted me to believe. And then I realized that, you know, she put the emphasis, the emphasis was on, it wasn't on belief, it should have been on in. I do not believe in things. I place my trust, I place my faith in certain things, usually in people, right? But things, I don't need to believe. There are some things that I know. I know the earth is more or less round, right? I don't need to believe that. There are other things that I think, right? There are other things that may or may not be so. I really don't know. And there are a huge amount of things that I have absolutely no idea of and can only wonder at and stand in awe, right? But you know, one of the lessons of modern science, and especially of physics and quantum physics in particular, is that everything we think we know for sure is totally up for grabs. It's all a matter of probabilities, right? There is nothing we can sort of put our finger on and say, yes, that's it, got it, ha, hold on to it. That's truth, right? And I'm very wary of the definite article of the truth, the meaning of life, the revelation, the etc. So this is what I call the agnostic stance, right? So if we bring things down to belief or unbelief, you know, atheists don't believe, theists believe, and so on. I think we're making religion very small. I think we're making ourselves very small. And I think we're making whatever we think of when we think of the word God, which is, by the way, far too small a word. It's only 3 letters, right? We're making that very small too. We're sort of taking everything down to the lowest common, to this flat 2 dimensions of belief, unbelief. And what I want to do is get way beyond that. I want to explore, and I want to wonder. And all those great existential questions of what are we doing here? And how did we even get here in the first place? And how can we manage to live with each other without killing each other? Wouldn't be a good idea. And what's the meaning of it all? And what happens when I look up at the sky? And how amazing that I'm actually here. How amazing that I'm here in Sri Lanka. How amazing that I'm talking to you right now. How amazing that my blood is inside my hand here. How amazing that these words are coming out of my mouth. I mean, it all seems just grand and amazing and something to be inordinately thankful for, just life. And what I see so much, it's another of the sins of fundamentalism, to my mind, is that it drains the color out of life. It drains the joy out of life. It says, okay, these are the rules, abide by the rules, right? There's no laughter, there's no joy, there's no poetry, there's no song. And you know, religion at its best is poetry. It's the enigmatic. It's what we can sense, what we can feel, but we cannot know for sure. So no, I do not believe, but I do not disbelieve either.
Now, my second question then is there are a lot of predictions in the Quran about what is going to happen. For example, on embryology, and it explains in detail, you know, the embryo and what happens. And many centuries later, the scientists have found out that what is inside in the Quran is exactly like what's happening.
Yeah.
What is your take on that?
Well, you know, we tend to think, I don't know why we do this. We're quite arrogant as 21st century people, you know. We tend to look at the 7th century, and I found this also writing about Mary of the 1st century, or Jezebel with the 9th century BC. We look at people then like, you know, we're looking through a telescope the wrong way around and made them very, very small. You put the telescope the right way around, and you realize that, wait a minute, first of all, people back then had a much better sense of metaphor and of poetry than we do, and much, much better memories, because things weren't written down. Poetry was all poetry, right? History was all history, and they remembered. Their memories, we don't need those memories now. We write something down, there it is, we can go look it up. People are amazed, you know, when the people in the West, when they see kids reciting the whole of the Quran, say, how do they do that? Well, it's a natural human ability. Only most of us have forgotten it because we're so busy sort of, you know, on our computers. What was the question? I'm sorry, I'm rambling. There was... yeah, I'm sorry, okay, got it. So the clot of blood, right? Yeah, the tiny little fetus, clot of blood and so on. So we imagine that people were ignorant then. We imagine that they were primitive somehow because they used herbal remedies, right? We who now use mare's urine in our contraceptives, as they did back then, except then it was camel mares. You know, nobody seems to know this, that what all we're doing today with medicine today is finding artificial alternatives to medicines that have been used long, you know, herbal medicines that were used a long time ago. And that there was women in particular who carried on these traditions, the wise women, the healers, the midwives. People knew a lot more than actually many of us now do.
Okay. So there's a question from the gentleman over there. And then we'll only have time for one more question here.
Me too?
And then we'll be done. Yeah, go ahead.
Madam,
I can go on.
Madam, you declared your being a Jew.
Well, thank you.
Are you a religious person or are you just a literary person?
Am I a religious person?
Are you religious or are you a literary person only?
I'm many things. I am many things. No, I do not think of myself as a religious person. I am secular. I am very determinedly secular.
You have studied so much about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and still remain is it that you are still a Jew?
I am a Jew. I was born Jewish. I will die Jewish. It's part of who I am. I'm Jewish, I'm agnostic, I'm a writer, I'm a psychologist, I'm a feminist, I'm a socialist, I mean, I can keep on going on like this. All these are part of who I am. If you take away any one of these facets, I will be somebody else. I will not be myself. I treasure the Jewish part of me as much as I treasure any other part of me. I don't have to practice Judaism to do that, right? My values come from there, but you know, they're essentially the same values that are in all the Abrahamic religions, in fact, that are in every religion. You know, you've got the basic golden rule, do unto others, and so on, right? And I have actually had many, many Muslims ask me, you know, how can you write so beautifully about Muhammad and not convert to Islam? I just say, well, you know, I quote the Quran. To you, your religion, to me, mine. It's that simple. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We have to ask the organizers. Okay, the last question.
Okay, we got another one. Yes.
Yeah? Last question, Amtish.
Actually, you told about social justice, freedom, and humanity Prophet Muhammad was fighting of. Actually, 2 days back, there was a report by Oxfam that I think 8 individuals have more wealth than the half of the population in the world.
Wait a minute, say this again.
So you talked about...
An Oxfam report that said what?
Yeah, so Oxfam report says 8 individuals in the world have more or equal wealth of the half of the population in the world.
Yes, I know. You're not going to make me use the T word, are you? Please, good, thank you. I do not want to use that word anymore.
So, do you think that there is a plot by the 1% of the population in the world against the spreading of Prophet's teaching?
A plot by the 1% of the population of the world against what?
Yeah, 1% population is against the spreading of principles of the Prophet Muhammad. Because when those principles are spread...
That the 1% of the world is against spreading the word of Muhammad?
Yes.
No, come on. All they're interested in is money. No, don't forget that among those 1% are quite a few who proclaim themselves to be the most loyal, possible, true, absolute Wahhabi Muslims. You know, it's very easy to see conspiracies and plots everywhere. And because, you know, it's convenient. It's a convenient explanation. And it's something I think all Muslims in particular should do with great caution. Because this conspiracy plot thing is now being used against them. And I say this, you know, as a Jew, I'm used to it. It's been used God knows how many times against Jews. Also by Muslims, by the way. And this totally dismays me that there is anti-Semitism among Muslims. It dismays me as much as the fact that there is Islamophobia among Jews, because the Jews have been through, in America, have been through what Muslims in America are now going through, for very different reasons. It doesn't matter. It's still bigotry. It's still hate. It's still stereotyping. And they should be partners against this. And they're not. Partly because of Israel-Palestine, but partly because people are just kind of, I don't know. We just keep making the same mistakes again and again. I'm sorry to end on that note. I know you'd like me to end up, okay. Can we take another question?
Okay. We've decided that we are taking 3 more, but just 1 minute, please. There are a couple more here. And then you, and then we'll be done. Yeah. There's 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would just like to ask about the research which you've done with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, including the capacity of his influence with the teachings in the Quran. what you have gone through, do you find any limitations or any negative notions in the Quran which influenced the Prophet, and there was something bad which the Prophet would have probably spread in the Arabian Peninsula or something like that, which is today taken as a negative thing by a lot of people who are having negative perceptions in interpreting the Prophet's life?
Can somebody...
Yeah, what I'm trying to ask is, according to your research in the Prophet's life or reading the Quran, do you find any negative attributes which you found in the Quran or in the Prophet's life?
Negative attributes in the Quran? I still don't quite get the question.
Did you see anything bad in the Quran?
Huh?
That you saw some,
Do I see anything bad in the Quran?
Yeah, simply put, yes?
Sure. Sure. There are violent parts in the Quran. Anyone read the Bible recently? Lots more. You know, these are texts that came out of a different context. Came out of the 7th century AD, current era, came out of the 5th century BC, came out of circumstances that, you know, if we are unaware of them, we expect, because they become sacred texts, because we regard them as sacred texts, we want to think of them as perfect and as sacrosanct. And they have survived, they've come down to us, perhaps, I don't know, I can't say, you know, but you can do textual analysis of the Bible and the Quran and other people's sacred scriptures, and you can see where human hands have come in here, have shaped them and so on. I have no idea, nobody has any idea, though there are lots of theories, why the Quran is arranged the way it is, except for the Fatiha from longest surah to shortest, more or less, right? In fact, what I tell people in the West who are trying to read the Quran, because, you know, it's a difficult book, I say, you know, with all due respect, and not in disrespect, but maybe you should start reading it from the back, from the shorter, more mystical verses, the earlier verses in the back, and work your way through to the front, which are the huge chapters in which, if you do not know the historical context, and you can't without reading the Sirah and so on, you'll have no idea what's happening, and it's very, very easy to take, you know, in the wrong way. You're asking me, do I think the Quran is perfect? It's like asking me, do I think the Bible is perfect? No, I'm not a believer. I don't think so. I find them fascinating, and I find great beauty in both. And I find things that are not so beautiful too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question from the lady here.
Leslie, do you think the fact that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he did not have sons, and thus there's this absence of a power hierarchy through lineage, it speaks a lot, for me in fact, that it left a stage open for women to be more proactive and to exercise their autonomy with greater assertion and oomph, if you like. But as Muslim women, I feel, that's my personal view, that we haven't. Why do you think that is the case, from your point of view?
You're asking me? Or?
She's asking you.
Because she was looking at you. Yeah, why has it taken us so long? Not just Muslim women.
Yeah.
Women all over the world. Why has it taken us so long to stand up on our own 2 feet and say, enough of this? Okay. Actually, for his time, it doesn't appear so great. I was trying to explain this to somebody in Gaul, so a Westerner, and she was looking at me like I was kind of nuts. I said, you know, for his time, Muhammad was pretty radical, you know, in his approach to women. She said, you know, having up to 4 wives was a pre-Islamic custom. So when they came to him and said, can we have up to 4 wives? What was the response? The revelation? It said, yes, you can. But only if you can treat all of them equally, and only if you can afford to keep all of them well, and only if you love all of them the same. And because you're only human and you know you won't be able to love all of them the same, better if you don't, right? And you know, the women in the story of, you know, after the Prophet are just dynamite. Well, Aisha, of course, you know, is just feisty as all hell. Fatima, I would have loved for her to be feistier, but she was. Well, who could be with, you know, when you're on the stage with Aisha, you don't have much choice. Khadija is just, I would love it. You know, she died before Muhammad became a leader. So we have very little of what she actually said. I would love to have had more. But you know, the same thing happened. You can go into early Christianity. Early Christianity, there were women bishops. Early Judaism, women took very, very powerful roles. And then what happens is that, with all due apologies to anybody here who's 60 years or old or older and has a long white beard, then the old men with long white beards took over. And it's only now that we're beginning to say, hey, wait a minute, having a long white beard does not give you a monopoly on wisdom.
Okay.
It's way past due.
Hello, Leslie. In response to a question that was posed to you by somebody in the audience, you mentioned that you were in awe of the world that we live in, the blood flowing through your arms, and so on and so forth. And there were two words that I picked up that you said thankful for.
I said what?
You said thankful for.
I'm not getting it.
Thankful for.
In that response, that answer, you mentioned two words, thankful for. What I would,
I'm still not getting them.
But you said you were thankful for the beauty of the world, the mystery of the world.
Yes, for the world. Yes,
yeah?
I'm thankful
you said,
for that. It's amazing that I'm alive.
So the two words that I want to refer to is, you said you were thankful for. The question I would like to pose to you is, who are you thankful to?
You see, is that who? You know, like there's a person. Like this huge concept that we have that we've reduced to just a nice, intimate little name like God is a who. Right? Do we have to be thankful to? Does thankfulness have to have a purpose? Does it have to have an object? Can we not just open up and sort of just be thankful to be here in the world? Let's see.
Okay, yeah. Last question.
Yeah, you have to speak loud because I'm not really hearing very well right now.
Hi, my question was more related to, again, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives, and just for you to brief upon your thoughts on what you felt when you did your research with Bibi Fatima, his daughter, versus Bibi Aisha, his wife, and what were the thought process as their characters and how they influenced Prophet Muhammad, in which way?
Yeah. So, how did the wives influence Muhammad?
Fatima and Aisha.
What?
The daughter and his wife. So the
we're
daughter,
talking about Fatima and Aisha again.
And Aisha.
Oh God, this is such dangerous territory, and I'll tell you why. I got quite a bit of criticism about After the Prophet, right? All of it focused on those two women. None of it was about anything else in the book. And the Sunni said, I was mean to Aisha, and I should have been far nicer to her and respected her far more. And the Shia said, I was mean to Fatima and sort of relegated her to the shadows and sort of, made her sort of far too insignificant a figure and should have given her a far bigger role. And actually, going back to your question, I think it's very, very interesting that all this criticism focused on the women, because the women are considered the weak point, the vulnerable point, right? It's so much of the criticism about Islam by Islamophobes focuses on the women, right? Actually, by the same Islamophobes who are now about to do their very best in the US Congress to take away women's rights, to take away women's health, women's access to health, and so on, by men who are actually waging a war on women, are criticizing Islam for the status of women in Islam. The status of women in Orthodox Judaism, by the way, is just as bad. And then, of course, what kind of Islam are we talking about? As though Islam is a monolith and all 1.5 billion Muslims worldwide think exactly the same way. Their influence on Muhammad. Aisha had more access. Quite simply, she had more access as a wife. And she lived longer. Aisha outlived everybody else in the story of the split. Aisha lived long enough to dictate, I've forgotten how many thousands of hadiths, right? Many of which were then later inauthenticated. But Aisha was the one who got to tell her story the strongest, as you might expect, because she was very outspoken. And Fatima did not. And you can't tiptoe around it. I can't change what actually happened. Should Fatima have had greater influence? Should this is not my role as either the teller of the story, as a historian, as a recorder of what happened, even as a psychologist. My role is not to pass judgment. My role is to make it real, make the story real. That's it. Thank you.
Knowledge Box, the value-based media network.